No, we're at 9 now. We're at 9 now. I just want to finish a reminder where we left in 8. And so we welcome those of you joining us online. We are in Genesis. We're going to be in chapter 9 and 10 mostly tonight, but we're just going to take a moment and make the connection by looking at the end of 8, where we read about how Noah built an altar to the Lord. And taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground again." And what would it look like today to create an altar to the Lord? My guess, I could be wrong, but my guess is none of you have gone out in your backyard and put like a giant sheep on a piece of something and burnt it up lately, right? Right? Okay, so we're not doing that. So what would it look like to make an altar unto the Lord today the way Noah did as a way of thanks? In our heart? Okay, I like that answer, but it's kind of ambiguous. Could you add a little to it? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So by heart, you're implying that we're yielding all that we are upon that altar of who we are. Okay. All right. Okay. We are the sacrifice. That's good. Now, what's the problem with making us the sacrifice? What does Romans say? We're to be a living sacrifice. And what happens to a living sacrifice when it gets hot? It wants to crawl off the altar, doesn't it? Yeah. And so we have to guard ourselves that when we are offering something to the Lord, that no matter how hot it gets around us, Shelley, there's a piece of paper there on the table you want to grab. No matter how hot it gets around us, our offering is still pure, right? I would even offer the hotter it gets around us, the more purified the offering. Does that sound good? And so Noah saw all that God did for him, all that he did for his family, how he brought him through circumstances. And as we learned last week, he was in that ark slightly over how long? Slightly over a year he was in that ark. And yet there he was offering up a sacrifice unto the Lord. And so now we move into chapter 9. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth." So what's God telling them to do? Get busy, right? Let's repopulate this earth, which means we are all related to Noah in some form or fashion, or at least one of his heirs. So, yes. "The fear and dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands." It's such an odd use of phraseology. What does it mean when he says that the dread of you will fall on all creation? Fear. So does that mean all animals will be afraid of men and women? The ones we eat, okay. How many of you have a dog that is not afraid of you because he's your dog? Right? Right? So is he afraid of you? No. So what does it mean that the fear? Because we know there are shark attacks, aren't there? We're in Alabama. There are alligator attacks, right? So what does it mean the fear of you will fall upon all creation? It's an odd statement, isn't it? So there's an authority, you're saying. Okay. There's an authority. That's a good start. Anyone want to add to that? Because this is important. Dread us, I would say, would probably, and you guys can add your own definition, but I would say, mean there's an intimidation factor. Kind of what your wife said, that we are the authoritative masters over all creation. Have you ever thought of yourselves as masters of creation? You're all like He-Man, master of the universe. Am I dating myself with that? You can go there. I know. The worst can go there. I know that. Yeah. Val in the back. Go ahead. Go ahead, James. That could be part of it. There's whether they define punishment as we would, obviously they don't, but there's a fear that something could happen. And so, how many of you have spoken strong to your dogs to get them to obey? Right? It may be a loving act, but yeah. Hmm. Hmm. I think there's something to that. You may not have heard what she said, that within that term dread or fear, there's the understanding of submission. Now, just like our kids should submit to their parents, right? Do they always? No. But, so do all animals submit to all human beings? No. But as a generalization across the earth, it's understood that mankind is now dominant over the animal kingdom. Oh, you want us to move ahead to the next verse? Wow, just pushing us ahead, Rosemary. All right. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Why is that weird for those of you that we talked about the other weeks? They did not eat animals until they were given permission this very moment. And I came up with a question that I think will stump the whole class. Paul's looking up like, oh yeah, you think so? After his long day, he's like, I don't know. Okay. What's that? No, I'm not going to save it for trivia. We're going to do it. Remember, trivia night this Sunday night. But anyway, what it is in the beginning, God created Adam and Eve to eat the vegetation of the land. That's clear. I mean, that's non-negotiable. That's in the Bible. Here, God is giving them permission to eat animal life. That's clear, right? In the Old Testament, God tells them certain animals they can eat and certain animals they can't, correct? That's Deuteronomy 14:15, that area. Later on, God gives Peter a vision in Acts 9. I believe it's Acts 9. It might be Acts 10. Gives Peter a vision and tells him all animals are clean. That's why we get to enjoy bacon, right? Seriously. So, does God change? And if you're going to say no, then you got to tell me why he flipped his approach to all across the Bible like this. Or does God change? Were there fish? Okay, so you're saying right. Now that's a good argument, Shelley, for the first part of it, but what about the second part where God tells the Israelites to only eat certain types of food, and then in Acts, I think it's Acts 10, tells Peter, oh, just have at it. So you covered the first side with a possibility, that was good, but then that doesn't connect with the second side of it then. Hey, let's go here, yeah? Get that protein in him. Get that protein in him, yeah.
The other thing I always thought of is possibly pigs way back into a wild pig may have been diseased. God may have seen them and known that they were diseased at the time. So don't eat them right now. Don't eat them.
But then he just changed it for Peter later on. I mean, that's an idea. I get it. That's an idea. Paul, did you want to add something? I thought I heard you say something. That's an idea. That's okay. While you're doing that, Greg's talking into his phone, hoping he can get the answer. So, don't think I didn't hear you, brother. I heard that. While you're thinking, Paul, do you want me to come back to you? Okay. Mandy in the back, and then Anna. Go. Okay. I could get that on the first half, but then why all of a sudden does he tell Peter? Like, how did Peter change that he allowed that? I'm not saying you're on the wrong track. I'm just trying to help flesh out what you're saying. Society shifted. Well, society was already allowing them to eat whatever they wanted. It was the Jews who were not allowed to eat certain things. So, like, society was going hog wild. You like that? That's good. They were going hog wild with what they were doing. But the rest of the Jews were saying, no, we can't eat that. You may not know it, but in 70 AD, one of the Roman emperors came, and in a way of insulting the Jews, he butchered and killed a hog right on the altar to kind of desecrate, whatever you want. Desecrate. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. Desecrate it. Okay, did you want to go with something? Okay. Okay. So you're saying there was an ethical, practical reason behind it, not so much a health reason itself. Okay. You're on the right track. I'm going to Greg, and then we'll come back over here. Yeah.
You started this in the Old Testament, God was talking to Jews. Now you're talking to Peter in the New Testament. He's a Christian.
And a Jew. And a Jew.
We don't have kosher law.
Right.
He's a Christian. He doesn't.
Right. Right.
He was a Jew.
So why did God allow Christians to then eat of whatever they wanted, but not the Jewish people? Collis, and then, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Go. Mm-hmm. So by including us, he did not exclude that part of the covenant law. So that means Christians, and I'm taking this to an absurdity, so I know you're not saying this, but that means, or not Christians, but people who become Christians don't have to leave behind their sinful practices. So which part of the law do we have to obey then? Do we have to obey the Ten Commandments? No, I'm bringing us back right to where we need to be. Let me come here because you had something. Oh, that's no fun. All right, I'll give you the. You guys want it? I'll let Greg try to get it with you. What?
God has called things to be clean in the New Testament. Jesus actually says there's nothing outside of man that can defile him. It's what comes out of man that defiles him.
Mm-hmm. Right. So he restated it. Right. That's where the rubber meets the road. Let me jump to just give me the answer, as you were saying. So obviously I'm belaboring this too long. Let me ask you this. Is it wrong to drink alcohol? For most people. If you're an alcoholic, you should stay away. I'm not saying that. But for the normal average person, is it wrong for them to have a sip of wine? No. Is it wrong to get drunk? Is it wrong to have sex with whoever you want? Is it right to have sex within your marriage? I'd wonder, how'd Paul come about that? Was that immaculate? Is that something you're not sharing with us going on there? Woo! Man. Did we get that on video? That was Greg Worth. Anyway, let me ask. Is it wrong to say whatever you want to anybody, no matter how much it would hurt them? Okay, is it wrong to say words that are helpful to people?
Wait, I'm sorry.
Okay, you can see where I'm going. Is it wrong to sleep? Is it wrong to sleep for 12 to 14 hours a day unless there's some kind of medical reason or something like that and just blow away your day? No, it leads to laziness, right? So God sets down these guides. I think I just lost all of you as one whole group. That's good. Let me bring it back to the middle. God sets standards so that we can demonstrate our obedience to him. And so when he says, sure, you can have alcohol, but do not get drunk, we are showing that we can enjoy what he's given us, but not be overindulging to a point where it can lead to sin. Unless you're someone who leans towards that sin, then you need to pull it back even more, right? Right, always in moderation. Some people's moderation has to be none, and that's understood. But I would argue that the reason God set down some of these health guidelines for the Jewish people, and I'm sure it's not the only reason, but a key reason, is that they had a way to demonstrate their obedience, to set themselves apart as different from all the other nations. I mean, they were already different, weren't they, in that they served one God, right? If you remember, I don't know if you ever read history, the Romans used to think the Christians were atheists because they didn't worship all these different gods. They thought it was strange that they would only worship one, and they considered them atheistic. And so they're already set apart and different. But at the time of Peter getting the vision, it was time to break down the walls between Jew and Gentile, and God allowed that wall to be broken down by allowing them to eat of different types of meat at that time. But we're also told not to give in to gluttony, right? So that means we may enjoy the food he's given us, but definitely 20 pieces of bacon's the max for one meal, right? Is that right? Yes. So, but we are meant to not, if any of you saw the hot dog eating championship, my kids and I watch it every year. What was it, 62 this year? 62 hot dogs in 10 minutes. It was very impressive. Can we agree that would be a form of gluttony? Right, okay. So I would argue that God was setting down not different, but just separate standards so people could show their obedience to him. Now, Shelley, I do think you were onto something with pre-flood and post-flood. I think that's true, but I was just getting us to think about the bigger picture. I think you were accurate with something there, too. Yes, there is a similarity in that now it's open to Jew and Gentile. I mean, heaven was always open to Jew and Gentile, but they were locking them out, and that's why Jesus was getting ticked off at the Pharisees, because they were keeping them out of the kingdom of God. So, but yes, yes. Right. 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 I hear what you're saying in that one was ceremonial, but it was still a sign of obedience. And so God was freeing them from some of those signs of obedience. Just like circumcision was no longer mandatory to be part of the kingdom of God. Yeah. 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 Right. Right. And you're right. And that's what I would argue with anybody who even lives outside of a place where they hear Christianity. They still have something written on their hearts that they know that there is a God and how they respond to him that way. And so, all right. Whew, thank you, everybody. I don't know if it was worth it. I thought it was fun myself, and that's really all that matters because I'm the teacher. And so... all right, it goes on next, and it has an interesting line. It says, and for your lifeblood I will surely demand, in this is verse 5, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal. Isn't that interesting? That if an animal hurts a human, somehow there's an accounting they have to have before God. What that looks like, I have no idea. But it's just a fascinating verse in there. But then he goes and he says, from each man too I will demand an accounting. And this is the verse I want us to talk about for a minute. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. So my first question is, does that mean, and now I want a good biblical answer to this because I know it's a political hot button. I don't care about the political. Is it wrong for any kind of country to have the death penalty if it says, if the very words of Genesis 9 say, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man's blood he shall be shed, for they're made in the image of God? But how do we know God allowed it? He's sovereign, but people do things that anger God all the time. So then is that leader or anyone who allows a man's blood to be shed for whatever reason, just or unjust, because a lot of unjust killings happened in countries too, and are they then accountable to God because they did? Let's say that they were a just killing, all right? Are they accountable to God then? By accountable to God, are they then condemned by God? No. Yeah. Right. Right. That's a great question. That would be the next step to the question, is what about militaries? Now, I want to take what the two of these guys said, and I want to take it to a biblical place now. In the Bible, let's just speak specifically of the Old Testament. Are there places God tells his people and their armies to wipe out unjust nations? So clearly, God is not opposed to a just war. And people can define that differently. I get that. We can argue about the semantics. I don't want to. I'm just taking the general statement. We can agree biblically there are times God not just allows, but tells that they should take them out, right? Do you remember that story where King Saul was supposed to wipe out all the Amorites? And he left the king alive. And Samuel came and said, what's going on here? You're supposed to take this dude's life. And he's like, Samuel, you don't understand. This I'm summarizing what he was saying. You don't understand politics. It's a good thing for us to leave him alive. We've taken care of business for you and everything. And what does Samuel do? He says, I understand, Saul. Politics are more important. That's what he says? No. He grabs the sword and does what? Takes out King Agag and takes him out and finishes the work that God told him to do. So we can agree scripturally that there are times God commands the righteous, well, at least I don't even want to say the righteous, but commands people to do a righteous act in his name to stop something evil. Yep. They took him out. I mean, the Old Testament's full of them. I'll be right with you. The Old Testament's full of them. Jehu, he was a commander, and he tricked all the false prophets to go into a giant building like he was going to worship this false god. And what does he do? He has his army just run right through him, right? So, all right, yeah. About what? I'm sorry. Ooh, that even makes it more complicated, doesn't it? Yes. Wow, that is so good. If you remember that the reason people hated Jeremiah, oh boy, we're really tangenting off of Genesis, aren't we? I'm having fun. The reason the reason people hated Jeremiah is because he said the Babylonians are going to come and bring God's judgment on us, and they said what? There is no way those wicked people are bringing judgment on God's people. That was and guess what happened? They did that, but as you said, God then judged them for all the things that they did also. And so it's just an interesting time to think of. I'm going to pull it back a little and tell you a funny story I heard about that had happened in Russia not too long ago. There was, and I hope this isn't an offensive story to anybody, but there was a man who killed another man because he was sexually assaulting his daughter. And it came before the judge in Russia, and the Russian judge, this was his ruling. Nope, to me, looks like a suicide, and after he killed himself, he dug his own grave and buried him. You're dismissed. That was his ruling, because he saw what the man had done from his perspective as just. I thought, well, if Russia ever got one right. But anyway, that's another. Terry, yeah. Right. That's kind of a catch, because we're all put to death unless you're Enoch or Jesus. So it's kind of or Elijah. Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot about Elijah in there too. One last thought on this, and we'll keep moving. This is a tricky subject, isn't it? I don't want to get this to sound corny, but this was the illustration that came to my mind. There's a comic book character called the Punisher, and he goes around and he kills horrific, horrible people. Drug lords, all kinds of people that he knows have done horrible things that the law can't get to. And you read those comics, and there's something in us, at least I'll say there's something in me, that says, that's justified. But is it really, if we brought that comic into real life? And if so, who gets to decide who gets to be taken out? Oh, it certainly happens at times, when people just take care of business, and so, yeah. That's good. Yeah. That's good. That we stand before God accountable for what we did. And if we took a life that God did not tell us to take, sure. Now, I'm agreeing with that statement, but I want to bring up another side to it. Did you guys hear what he said? Did everybody hear? Okay. What about stepping on 1,000 ants because they're traveling into your house? Just because they're coming in. Preach it, sister. I'm just telling you. Do you see why I believe this is a lot going back to our original conversation about the eating of foods? And, well, they don't carry anything. But we look at that example, and that's how we look at this, is how, I want to make sure I say this right, how would God judge us for the action that we do? And so just like we need to listen to God, is this an animal I should eat or I shouldn't eat, back as these laws were going on, so God says to us, is this an action in which I have called you justified in doing? Because if you remember in the book of Judges, not many people talk about Ehud. He was a left-handed man sent by God to kill a horrible king who was doing horrible things. And if you remember, the Bible's very graphic. It says he plunged his sword into the fat king, and he was so fat that the blubber closed around his sword and he couldn't pull it out. So he just ran and took off. That should be a movie. We could make a good movie out of that, rated R. But the biggest principles I want us to get, I'm having fun. I hope you're enjoying, I'm just trying to make these questions fun for us to think about, but they all come down to listen and be obedient to God. Because there are other times when people want to take out evil people, and God says, no, my vengeance will fall upon them. And if you take them out ahead of time, you're not doing my will. And so it's so valuable that we have a relationship with Him where we are listening to Him in everything that we do. From these bigger issues that we're talking about murder and so forth, to the simple issues of everyday life. Are we listening for God's wisdom in how we handle this? So, any thoughts before we move on? Yeah. So the premeditated part for you plays a big role in it also, because you've gone through that process of feeling revenge and everything, whatever the circumstance would be, and going ahead with it. And so that certainly would play a role in it also, I would think. So, all right. Any other thoughts before we move on? Yes. To what? I don't know what a palmetto. I don't know what that is. Oh. Insects from the pastor's perspective are free game. Okay? I'm not saying God feels that way. That's me stepping out offering my opinion, but I consider them free game. Absolutely. So, all right. Sorry, I didn't know what a palmetto. My knowledge is not that high on this stuff. That's right. That's right. If you ever read The Hiding Place, the fleas protected the women from being raped by the guards and the men because they didn't want to get near unclean people like that. So she found joy and thankfulness in such things. And so, yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. That's good. I'll write that one in later. So, all right, let's get to verse 8 here and kind of keep moving along. We know that we should be fruitful and increase and multiply. And so then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. So it's not just for Noah, right? It's not just for Noah's sons. This covenant is for all of us. And with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, the animals, all that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth, I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off from the waters of the flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And we talked last week about how that doesn't mean there aren't localized floods. God's saying, I will never send my full judgment upon the world where I'll crack open the deep, crack open the top, and the waters will flood the whole earth. So that's his promise. And what does he use as a sign for his promise? This never struck me. I know you're all smarter than me, so you probably all thought about this. But isn't it interesting? What is the rainbow? When does the rainbow usually come out? After a rain. I don't know why. I mean, I knew that, but it never struck me that this was a sign that reminds you of the judgment that once came, that I am with you now as my promise. Now, I was thinking, is that promise to everybody? Or is it open to everybody? Let's leave it at that. Right? So it's a promise for the generations to come. Is it any... Do I go there? I'll go there. Is it any surprise that people want to use the rainbow as a sign of rebellion and pride? I'm just going to leave it at that. They want to take the rainbow, which is a promise of God's faithfulness, and use it for man-centered ego and pride. And they want to use that flag that way when it represents the promise and faithfulness of God. And so, anyway, I'll just leave that there for us to try. Sure, yeah. Yep, I just came across a friend of mine online. She's very up to date on some of this supernatural stuff, and she's pointing me out that there's actually a new movement within, quote, Christianity. It's not really within Christianity, but they say it is, of Christian witchcraft, where they're witches, but they're Christian witches. And they have a creed, they have everything about what they believe, and the whole thing is just narcissistic, create God in my own idolatrous image stuff, but they call themselves Christian witches. And is that right? I should get that name. I'd like to check out that place sometime. Yeah. Okay, interesting. I like getting into those places, just being me. So, just something to think about. So, what are other areas in the Bible where God gave a sign of something? Anybody think of anything? Start Old Testament. Anybody? Yeah, he gave a sign that represented something. The flood could be a representation of baptism. What did you say? Right, that was what it was a sign that they should follow God. I'm looking more for a sign, like the rainbow is a sign for all eternity until Christ comes again. Were there any other signs that were meant for all of God's people for at least a period of time? Circumcision. Remember in the Old Testament? That was a sign of God's covenant people, right? Sure it was. What is the cross a sign of? God's death and victory over the grave. And so God will use signs to direct us to Him and help us to see Him. And so right here we see that also with the rainbow, just like the other signs. Butterfly. Well, the Bible doesn't say that, but it certainly is something that we utilize, absolutely, just like we use the fish to represent Christian, and the early church did. So I'd say, yeah, that could fall into that also, too. So, all right. Well, let's kind of keep moving along a little bit, past the rainbow, and so forth. Oh, and what does the bread and the wine or grape juice represent? Right? Are there people that aren't Christians that understand that's what it represents? They don't have to believe it, but they know that's what it represents? Many. Some, right? That it's a sign of God's body and blood. All right, let's jump ahead to verse 18, if that's okay. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Jephthah. Or Jephthah. Yeah, him too. Okay. Okay. Now, so we have 3 sons that came out of the ark, right? 3 sons with their wives. And it says, these were the sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered among the earth. And that map I gave you, don't look at it. You don't have to look at it yet. We'll get to it for chapter 10. But you're going to find that map helpful with what we discuss here. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. Isn't that interesting? One of the first things he did was what? Plant a vineyard, right? Now, I just want to give you a neat kind of comparison here between Adam and Noah. Just something to think about. Noah was a man of the soil. Adam was a man made from the soil. Noah planted a vineyard. Adam planted or worked within a garden, right? Noah drank some wine and became drunk, and his nakedness was revealed. Adam took the fruit from Eve and brought sin into the world. Adam had 2 godly sons and 1 wicked one. Noah had 2 godly sons, and it looks like a wicked one. So there's just some similarities throughout Scripture that are brought to our attention through this. The what? Yes, God was the first one to clothe them with an animal, right? But that wasn't a sacrifice, because he'd be sacrificing to himself, and that would be kind of weird, and so. But yeah. So, yes. I don't know, but it became a really weird word to call people when I was growing up as a Gen Xer. But that's in chapter 10, so if you could give me a few minutes to get to that. No, we're in chapter 9 still. We're in chapter 9 as I'm finishing up 9 here. So, all right, let's just sum this last story up a bit so we can make sure we get to chapter 10 and get through it quick. Noah, one of the things he did after he had kind of gotten himself settled on the earth again, some people believe it was at least a generation later, because you'll read of sons of Ham and others who were born, and they weren't born till after Noah's flood. So they believe this didn't happen just like right after. It wasn't like he offered a sacrifice, he went over there and got drunk and lied around naked, okay? Does everybody, the Bible reads like that, but there's a time frame in there, okay? So a time frame later, Noah's enjoying his vineyard. Can we say that? Enjoying his vineyard, right? And this teaches us not to drink wine, right? Just kidding. It doesn't teach us that at all. He's enjoying his vineyard. He got a little too plastered, and he goes off and he falls asleep naked in his tent, right? Why was this a sin? Because he drank too much? Okay. What's that? Well, there were no other women. Except for his son's wives, I guess. But yeah. But yeah. And the drunkenness. And so where in the Bible, see, I'm trying to help us think theologically. Where in the Bible does it say that drunkenness is a problem? If we agree that for the average person, having a glass of wine or a beer isn't a problem, where does it say drunkenness is a problem? Well, then that does become a problem. I agree. That does be. Although, let's be fair, there's only like 8 of them on the earth at the time. Come on now. It wasn't like the whole world's watching. So, anyway, there's that. But I share that with you because it's important that we're able to explain to people why we as Christians hold to what we hold to. And, yes, he does mention it 7 times. And if you'd like, I will share one of those times if you would like. You're right. In Ephesians 5, he's very clear. He says, be careful then how you live. Don't be unwise, but be wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, don't be a fool. Understand the Lord's will. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be what? Filled with the Spirit. In other words, you are putting another spirit within you. I find it fascinating that we call them wine and spirits at stores. You know, by getting plastered, you're putting another spirit, another controlling factor in your body that can cause you not to act godly as you might desire. Does everybody see that? So, yeah.
Like a big deal in the Bible, but there was no other big deal. Somebody gets drunk. Do you think this is the first time man has gotten drunk? God kind of intervened here and saying, okay, this is something you guys need to keep in mind. And if you drink too much of this,
Yeah.
you keep this up. But it's almost like, I don't remember anything else saying that anybody got drunk.
We're not told of anyone. Some would assume because the people were so rebellious against God before the flood, but you're right. We're not told of anyone that actually did. I think though I'd argue the bigger lesson here is what? Who was called a righteous man by God? Noah, right? Even in the book of Ezekiel, I believe it's chapter 14, he talks about 3 righteous men that walked the earth. And he talked about Daniel, he talked about Job, and he talked about, guess who? Noah. And so that's how God saw him. And yet this righteous man, is it fair to say the most righteous man on the earth at that time? Yeah? Even he can fall into temptation to sin. And it's a reminder to us that we are living in a world that longs to yield itself to sin. And even as righteous people, it can be difficult to pull ourselves away from those things. Now, we know we have the Holy Spirit guiding us, strengthening us, and all those things. But that it does show us that even Noah, who was a righteous man, sinned, but God still saw him as a righteous man. Because thousands of years later, he has Ezekiel telling us he was a righteous man. So we need to be a little less apt to beat ourselves up when we may make a sinful mistake. Now that doesn't mean we take it lightly. Amen? Right? That's not what, you know me, that's not who I am. But it does mean we understand that our forgiving God can help us move forward again and be seen as righteous in his sight because of what Christ has done for us. Amen? I'm just sharing that for any of you who, like me, sometimes struggle with remembering the things you've done and beating the things you've done. God's let them go. We certainly have to deal with those circumstances, but he's let them go, and he still sees us as righteous in his sight. All right. Last question, and then we're going to finish up chapter 10. This one will be fascinating for you. Verse 24. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done. If you remember the story tells us that Ham went in and saw his father, right? And then later, he tells his brothers, and what do his brothers do? They walk backwards in, put a cloak over him so as not to disgrace their father. But now I'm going to ask you a question. As we understand that story, who does it seem like sinned against Noah, or against God by doing what he did with Noah? Ham. That's what you would think. Ham was the second oldest. But now we read in verse 24, and I'm only bringing this up not to confuse you, but I spent like an hour of study on it, so I have to share it, or else I feel like I wasted my time. So now Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done, and he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Wait a minute. I thought it was Ham. Yeah, Canaan's the youngest son of Ham, isn't he? Ham's just a weird word. What's that? Canaan's the youngest son of Ham. So why is Canaan being cursed if Ham's the one that did it? Anyone else have trouble saying Ham? I just think that's kind of weird. But anyway, that's a tough one, isn't it? That's like me going out and doing something stupid tonight and a prophet coming to my house and saying, "Danielle, You must face the consequences of that. That's stupid, right? So why is God cursing Canaan? Because we know God's not stupid, instead of cursing Ham. Right. It implies that Canaan did. So, now I won't straggle you along. That could be one of the thoughts, and some have argued that he played a part in some role with that. Yes. That's the question. Why does he curse Canaan? And I'm going to share with you a couple of perspectives. You're welcome to embrace whichever one you prefer. As you know my habit, I go back to the early church fathers first, and we go from there. There was an early church father named Origen who lived within 150 years of the apostles. He was very, very early on. He says, in order to escape the difficulty suggested by Canaan, the youngest son of Ham saw his grandfather. Noah lying exposed and reported it to his father Ham, and thus the theory. In other words, he's saying that there's a tradition in the Old Testament of going to the head of the family and saying the youngest son, and that implies the grandson. And so it's possible that when Noah, it says, Noah awoke and he said to his youngest son, we know Ham wasn't the youngest. So even that part doesn't make sense, right? But who was the youngest of the grandkids? Canaan, right? So that the curse falls upon Canaan, which most likely means that Canaan is the one who at least went into the tent first, and the text implies two things. No, let me rephrase that. Possibility of two things. It certainly implies that Canaan mocked his grandfather for what happened, which is offensive. Some believe the Hebrew text implies that there was sexual conduct, but that I don't want to jump that far because the text isn't that clear with us about that. So but I am sharing what some believe the text is saying. But either way, it's understood that Canaan, the youngest of the grandkid, went. Then if he saw this and was making fun of Noah, who would he go to tell about it? His dad. And then Ham went in, and Ham did nothing but tell his older brothers. And then his older brothers respected Noah in the process. I'm sorry, older and younger brother. Thank you. Older and younger brother. Mm-hmm. So I know all your life you've been wondering about that set of scriptures, but now you know. And so, anyway, but that's why he says, cursed be Cain, the lowest of slaves, he'll be a slave to his brother because of that. And so, I'm going to jump ahead again, and we're going to move to the table of nations for the last 5 minutes. So I invite you to pull out, if you did not get a piece of paper that looks kind of like this, you want to grab one off the back white table or have somebody run one to you. Or you can just pick it up at the end if you have something you can look at. We certainly have extras. I found this fascinating. Because when you read the Table of Nations, trying to understand what it is saying, I mean, how many of you want me to go, and the sons of Jephthah, Gomar, Magog, Madai, Javan. Ooh, that's what I use cologne-wise. Anyway, but we don't want to read all that. But when you read through it, it talks about how they started to expand. And as you look ahead in your Bible, what happens next in chapter 11? Tower of Babel, right? And so the first had to be an expansion. And that's why, I just want to cover a couple of short ones, and then we're just going to look at this table to finish up. In chapter 10, verse 8, I just want to touch on your question, Collis. We finally got to it. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who grew to be a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. This is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. I just like this because it reminds us that whatever we do with our lives, it's before who? It's before the Lord. So whatever we're doing with our lives, however, a mighty mother before the Lord, a mighty worker before the Lord, put in whatever we do with our lives, God sees us as equipped for that specific calling that he's asking us to do. So, there's that one, and also in verse 25, as we jump ahead, it says, one was named Peleg, because in his time the earth was divided. Another Hebrew word is scattered, and that's what it's talking to in our map to finish off our time together. That at the time of Peleg, that the world was being scattered or divided around. Now, just an interesting thought. The one son of Noah, Shem, do you know that he lived to see Abraham born? And that he lived to see Isaac born? Well, no, Noah, it seems he would have passed away by that, but his sons were alive at that time. So Abraham got a first-hand knowledge about what the flood was like. You ever realize? That's fascinating, isn't it? Abraham and Isaac got this first-hand knowledge from Shem about what it was like. And so I just thought I'd throw that out because it's kind of interesting to see how it all plays together. But now let's just take the last 2 minutes and just look at this chart we have here on this page. I found it fascinating to read that one of the sons, Jephthah, that he expanded all the way into Russia, into Germany and Poland and Italy, while the other one expanded down into Africa and Morocco and Libya and Egypt and Ethiopia. And then Shem expanded into Iraq and Syria and Saudi Arabia and all these different places on this map. And it helped me realize how small the earth really is. That in a short amount of time, all these families expanded out into these regions where they dominated these different regions and quickly moved across the earth. Now, we're going to learn about the Tower of Babel next week, where they're going to send their leaders together. What I don't quite get, and I don't have an answer to this, but as we finish, I'd love to know if you have any thoughts. Why do you think they changed their languages after they spread apart? Because we all know Noah's 3 sons didn't all speak different languages, right? It started with one unified language, English. Just kidding, I'm not that way. But it started with one universal language. Why do you think they chose to change languages as they spread apart? Whereas in the very next chapter, we read that they didn't all speak. Yeah. I'm going into Babel. Like, I'm not saying the question right. I'm sorry. What I'm saying is, why do you think it was important for God? We know that he wanted to separate them from doing all things at once. But how do you think that language then disseminated? Like when God cursed them all, do you just think thousands of people in each, quote, tribe or family just all of a sudden started speaking Russian or started speaking Moroccan or anything? Like, how does that happen? Any thoughts? I'm just curious. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. So you see this as an anti-Pentecost, where it's doing the reverse. That's fascinating. Greg, get your hand up, I think.
But it has nothing to do with the Holy Spirit. It's the exact opposite, because Ham and Egypt were so polytheistic.
Multiple gods. Yeah.
Multiple gods, Baal, and different
Yeah.
child sacrifices even done to their gods.
Right.
Which is completely opposite of what
Right.
Pentecost was all about.
Right.
But I think it had to do with worshiping different gods, and that's what caused the languages to be completely different. Develop.
Okay. Okay. Just something for us to think about for next week. And Yep. 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 And though I've not been there, I heard that one part of Scotland, you can barely understand what they're saying with their dialect compared to another end. And so it's just something for you to think about, because I've been processing that, and I'm like, did that just happen all at once? And I hear what you're saying, like God made it happen on Pentecost all at once, and you're saying it's like the reverse Pentecost, where he kind of broke down all their languages. And it's just something for us to think about. How did that happen? I always wondered, because I can't imagine all of humanity spread out and then came back to the same spot to hang out. That seems a bit odd, you know? So did he just flip all their languages at once to their different territories, or what? I don't know. I have enough trouble just speaking good English. So, so anyway, yeah, in the back. So because of the taking away of the single language like say it was language A, you're saying God took language A away from everybody, and thus they were forced to then develop their. That might be. Oh, I like that. Thank you for saving that for the end, man. Bringing that. That's good. I like that. Anybody got any problem with that? I think that works. That works for me. That's good. You're in the front row next week. No, I'm just kidding. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, James. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think we can agree the Spirit initiated the process. I like that. That works. I'm going to process more for that next week. But I'll let you go this week. It's 5 after or so. Thank you, everyone. Does anybody have any last-minute questions before we break? We're good?